I messed up. I have to start this all the way over because this is all I have left. And the worst part is, I don't have enough time to do all of this because this is a testament and I need to kick it into gear. Smooches and welcome back to Live Laugh Lauren. If this is your first time here, based on the channel name, my name is Lauren. No, it's not Todd. I don't know why it would be anything else. Anyhow, up here I do all things cozy and crafty as I take you along into my creative life. Today we are going to be talking about frogging a project when you're already on a time crunch because your girl is currently dealing with that situation as we speak. So, let me give you the lowdown. I was working on a test for this new air, and it was for this beautiful pair of shorts. They are literally so adorable. It's a simple pair of shorts, and then the bottom has this lace edge. So, when the pattern does come out, I would highly recommend it because based on what I've done so far, I've loved how it's been written. I've done other of her patterns, and I highly recommend her patterns overall. They're just so cute and unique, and I'm obsessed. Anyhow, so with this pair of shorts, I went ahead and when I first started the project, I was being a good knitter and I made gauge swatches. The first gauge swatch was off by I think 2 times the amount of stitches I needed, so I knew I needed to cut down a lot. And this was mostly due to the fact that she was in her pattern and the girl was working with cotton. I love cotton yarn. Literally the top I'm wearing right now is made of cotton yarn. It's like perfect for the summer. I already have a ton of really warm shorts, and I wanted something that I could wear easy and breezy on the beach. So I decided to opt in for cotton yarn. One thing to note with cotton yarn is you have to be super careful with your tension because it's super stretchy compared to merino wool. So if you don't hold it tight, then it will end up really big. And also, as you wear it, it also tends to grow. So it's just something to take into account, which is kind of where we're getting into with the problem that I ran into. Anyhow, I made the first gauge swatch and it wasn't good because I decided to knit it on the beach where it is super salty in the air. And I'm already a very loose tension knitter, so I ended up with a gauge watch way too big. So when I went to go do my second gauge watch, I made sure to hold it with a tighter tension, which definitely helped a lot, but I ended up having to go down a needle size. It took me 3 gauge watches to meet gauge. Watch my video about gauge watches to learn more about the importance of them. Honestly, at that time, I was so certain that the knitting universe would bless me. I was putting in the time. I made my 3 gauge watches. I finally hit the right one. I got the tension right. I was holding it tighter than I usually do. I did all my homework. I measured my stitches. I blocked them. I respected the whole process. I went through the whole emotional journey of making 1, 2, and 3 gauge watches. Not those back there. We will get into why I don't have the gauge watches. And I was for certain that I'm gonna have the best product ever. I finally found the needle size that I needed to hit gauge. So I went ahead and I cast on, as one does, maybe even a little smug, I might say. Look at me being all mature. I didn't skip the swatch. I made sure my measurements were right. I am entering my responsible knitting era and leaving the type B-ness that I usually have when it comes to knitting, such as using my engagement ring as a needle marker sometimes. And then, somewhere along the way, I realized it was a little wrong. I might not have enough yarn to finish this project strong because my finished garment was a little too big. And that is such a specific type of pain because it's not like my project is ugly or my stitches are off. It's not that I hate the pattern. The issue is I made a choice from the get-go and it followed me throughout the entire pattern, and there's nothing I can do about it except start from the beginning and live to face the consequences. I looked at the amount of yarn I had left and all the optimism within me left. And I was trying so hard to think, maybe if I shorten it a little bit, it'll be okay. I did all the knitting math, trying to work out some possible solution in my head to hopefully prevent me from having to start from the beginning, but nothing I could think of was adding up or working out. Because at that point, I would either have low rise shorts, which it's a moment, but it's not for me. No. I like it to be right at my belly button. That's my preferred short length, and I didn't want to compromise on my own preference for the pattern. And I tried to convince myself throughout the whole making of this project that maybe if I stop looking so much into it, it'll just work out in the end. And then as I got towards the end, I realized that yes, I did not have enough yarn. And while I could have made the size work, I wasn't going to be able to finish the project. And the yarn store I got the yarn for was all out of the yarn I needed. So deep down, I knew it. I was simply going to have to frock it. And that is the thing I want to talk to you today about. That awful moment when you know a project isn't gonna work, but you are already under the pressure of trying to get it done. You have already spent hours on it. You already made multiple gauge swatches. You double, triple checked your math. You've spent hours committing time to this project. And still, the best choice is to rip it all back and start from the cast on. You may not want to know it. You may be actively trying to avoid it. But deep down, we all know that that's sometimes the best decision to do. But this has happened to me where I just fold it and put it away and hide it so I don't have to look at it. That happened to me many times. I remember there was one time I was making my Snoopy sweater, and the amount of times it took me to get the right sizing was crazy. And it took me I think 3 times before I got the right sizing for it. And I just kept trying to put it away, but eventually I got it right. And with that to say, I'm very grateful that I ended up ripping it back and starting fresh. Because deep down, something is wrong. The stitch count is off. The fit is off. The yarn and the pattern just aren't speaking the same language, which is kind of what I found myself in. A pattern called for merino. I was using cotton, and the fittage was just not fitting. The size you chose is eating away at your yarn stash. Or maybe the project is just technically fine, but it just isn't for you. There's nothing wrong with that. The finished project should fit you, and it should be something that you're happy to show off and wear. And then comes the thought that every craft person, every fiber artist comes to every now and then. I think I need to frog this. Because I think that there's a sneaky belief in knitting, and honestly in creative work in general, that if you're on a deadline, you just have to keep pushing and go through it. You make it work and you get the result that you're looking for at the very end. Sometimes the most efficient thing to do is just to stop. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is unravel. Sometimes frogging isn't a failure. It's more like the project is telling you a truth that you were trying to avoid all along. When we talk about frogging, it's usually stuck to the knitting world, and it refers to taking your project and ripping it back. So undoing your stitches. And it's called frogging because you rip it. Frogging. It sounds kind of silly. Almost cute. Oops, I need to go back and frog it. But emotionally, frogging is so much more than that. The disdain I have for frogging is absurd. Because you're not only undoing the stitches, you are undoing a lot of valuable time. You are undoing the evening you spent knitting it on a Tuesday. You're undoing the stitches you made on a long car ride to your cousin's wedding. You're undoing the stitches you watched while watching some crappy binge watching show about some high school romance, and all the time and effort and emotional labor you put into this product. Pull back the optimism you had from when you were casting on you're ripping back the optimism you had while casting on and double checking you had cast on 200 stitches. I think that's why frogging is so painful. It's not just the yarn, it's more the story that you're ripping back and the time you've spent invested into this piece. There's also this little tiny voice that starts to pick up as you start realizing that something is wrong. It says, you should have caught this earlier. It says, a better knitter would have noticed this mistake earlier. It says, you've wasted so much time. It says, now you're never gonna finish anything. And the more pressure you put on yourself, the louder that internal voice gets. When there is no deadline, frogging doesn't feel as pressureful, if that makes sense. When there is no deadline, frogging can almost feel like part of the process. Annoying, sure, but totally manageable. But when you're on a time crunch, God, frogging feels like the worst decision ever. It feels like admitting defeat when you're already lacking momentum to keep going forward. But here's the thing that I keep coming back to. Continuing a project that is already going in the wrong direction is a decision. Not frogging is not neutral. Every row you knit after you realize something is wrong is wasted energy and potential. It's still yarn being worked towards a project you're currently resenting the fit of. So the question isn't, do I have time to frog? The question is, do I have the time to keep going in the wrong direction? This is where the sunk cost fallacy finally enters the chat. The sunk cost fallacy is a concept where you have already invested energy, money into something, and you feel like since you've invested all of this time, energy, money into it, you have to continue even if the results are negative. And knitters are very vulnerable to this because knitting is slow. Even a quick project is not super quick when comparing to something that you could just buy at the store. We spend hours making just a little square piece of fabric. So when we knit something wrong, we get to the point where we're like, we've already gotten this far. Why not stop? Well, I should just keep going. I've already invested so much time into this. But I already knit this much is not a good excuse to keep going. I think one of the harder things to accept is the time is gonna pass anyways. Whether you finish the project or frog it, the hours you invested to it are already spent. Those hours are not coming back, whether you would like them to or not. And trust me, I know that sounds bleak, but I also find it extremely freeing because if that time is already gone, then I don't have to make the next decision to try to rescue the project. I can make the decision for what I want next to happen. Do I want this finished project as it currently exists? Do I want to wear it? Do I want to gift it? Do I want to keep spending time with it? Do I like the fabric? Do I like the process? Would fixing it now help me from not being disappointed later? Those questions are so much more useful than, well, what about the time I've already spent? Because that question stuck. Keeps you bargaining with a project that's already shown you who it is. And listen, I say this as someone who has been bargaining with this project. Been looking at those shorts and I'm like, oh, surely as I was making them, they'll fit differently. Of course, when they're finished, they'll fit right. Sometimes it is fine. Sometimes blocking truly is a savior. Sometimes the styling can really help a lot. Sometimes the project is just in its awkward teenage phase and needs to figure itself out. Sometimes you're just not being patient. Sometimes you're being avoidant. I think learning the difference between both of those are very important in terms of creative skills. Now, let's talk about the time crunch part. That's just one thing to say, oh, frogging is okay in a philosophical tone. And it's another thing to say, oh, frogging is okay 3 days before a trip that you're planning, or you have 2 days to finish before a test knit is supposed to be complete, or that gift that you need to have ready. Her birthday's tomorrow. In those moments, frogging feels like it's going backwards. But I want to challenge that a little bit. Frogging is not always going backwards, it's more so just changing routes. Say you're driving somewhere and you took the wrong turn. Turning around is technically going in the wrong direction for a little bit, but it's not failure, you're just getting back to the correct path. Knitting can be the same way. If the project isn't going to become what you need it to be, then every row forward might be taking you further from the desired outcome. So while it may look like ripping back is losing progress, in the long term, you're actually achieving progress. There are also situations where frogging can save you massive amounts of time. If your gauge is off and your sweater is going to end up being 4 inches too long, frogging at the yoke might be painful. Frogging after the body's done and doing the sleeves, that's devastating. If you notice your stitch pattern is misaligned, ripping back 10 rows is annoying, but trying to do a duplicate stitch, stretch it, block it, and fix it post, that's just going to create so much more problems later down the road. If the yarn isn't the right thing for the project, trying to force that to make it right, sometimes you're trying to fit a square into a round peg and it just isn't going to work out. I think is the thing that we often forget about. The yarn still exists after you frog it. The knowledge that you gain from the project is still there. And your skills are still there, if not improved, after you frog. The only thing you lose is the current version of the project you were working on. And maybe that version needed to be revised. I also think frogging can bring up a ton of shame, especially if you already have a few projects in the works, or a lot of projects in the works, or an amount of projects we're not going to disclose at this time. This is the pressure to be a finisher, to be disciplined, to have a neat little queue and finish everything in order, to not cast on too many things, to not abandon projects, to not be wasteful, not to be flaky. And I understand where that pressure comes from. Finishing is satisfying. Finishing teaches you things that you didn't know casting on. There is value in pushing through the boring middle and achieving the finished project. But finishing doesn't automatically make it virtuous. Finishing something you hate just to prove you can finish is not succeeding. Sometimes the mature creative decision is to say this isn't serving me anymore. Sometimes the lesson is discernment. Sometimes the lesson is trusting your taste. And sometimes the lesson is learning that you can change your mind. And I think that that's especially hard and knitting because we are making physical objects. A half-finished sweater in the basket, that feels like a frog project feels like you failed. But what if we thought about frogging as editing? Writers delete paragraphs, filmmakers cut scenes, painters paint over sections, musicians scrap takes. Almost every creative field, revision is expected. But in knitting, revisions can take up hours of work, which feels a bit dramatic if you ask me. Still, at the end of the day, it's still a revision. It's just editing the project. It's saying this draft is not the final draft. And I love that framing because it makes frogging not feel as serious. You're not ruining the project. You're just taking control of it. You're deciding that the finished object matters enough to be honest about the current state of the draft. So, how do you know when to frog? Obviously, there's no perfect answer. Some of it's intuition, some of it's experience, some of it is just being tired and looking at it with fresh eyes and being like, this isn't it. But I do have a couple questions I like to ask myself before I decide to frog back. The first question I have, is this a technical mistake or is it just a design choice that I'm not loving? A technical stitch could be something like a drop stitch, the wrong gauge, incorrect stitch count, twisted cast on, misread chart, sleeve decreases in the wrong place. Those problems usually have a pretty clear answer. You can decide whether this problem is going to impact the overall fit of the garment once it's all done. A taste problem, on the other hand, is pretty different. That's when there's nothing really wrong, but you just don't like it. You don't like the color that you chose, which is super hard to do, to be honest. You don't like the drape. You don't like the neckline. You just don't like the way that the yarn is behaving. You don't like the version of yourself that this project is asking you to become. Taste problems can be harder to justify because there's no clear answer to it. But I just don't like this as enough information in itself. It is allowed to matter. The second question I ask myself is, will this bug me once I finish it? Not, does this bug me right now and is making me a bit over dramatic right now? Will I be tugging at it as I wear it? Will I avoid reaching for it? Will I feel the mistake in my hands even if no one else sees it? There are some mistakes I can genuinely live with. A tiny stitch that's off under my underarm, that's fine. I'm probably not gonna frog back a whole sweater for that. Slightly wonky edge on the seam, fine. A row on my sweater where the tension changed slightly because I was in a different environment, honestly, probably fine. But there's other things that are gonna bug me forever. Fit is a huge one. If the neckline's off, it bugs me so much. If the fabric doesn't feel right, also I'm not wearing it. Anything that makes the garment uncomfortable, veto. And then the third question I ask myself, am I avoiding frogging because I actually like this version, or am I just embarrassed and don't want to admit that I have to frog back? Sometimes I realize I might just be continuing because I believe in the project. I'm continuing because I don't want to admit that I was wrong. And that's not a good enough reason to keep knitting. The fourth question is, what would I tell a friend to do if they were in the same situation as me? This one is helpful because we tend to be more kind to our friends as opposed to ourselves. If a friend showed me a sweater she was working on and was like, I hate this yarn, I hate the fit, I'm gonna tell her, it's okay, let's frog back and let's find a different yarn to use to make this sweater. And it's not gonna be easy, trust me, I get it, but I want you to make something that you'll actually wear in the long term. Frog it and free yourself. Sometimes I need to give myself that same permission. When I am on a time crunch though, I feel like the decision has to be a little bit more practical because time pressure makes everything feel so urgent. And when things feel urgent, it is hard to think clearly. First, when is your actual deadline? Not the fake deadline I invented for myself because I'm too go-getter. The actual deadline. Does this project need to be finished because it's a gift or a test knit or for a trip? Those are all different. Or did I just emotionally tell myself I really want to get it done by Friday? Both of those are totally different things. Second, what on this project has to be considered done for it to be considered done? Does it need to be fully blocked and photographed and woven in all the ends? It needs sleeves. Does it need to be perfect or just functional? Sometimes we make deadlines way bigger than they actually are. Maybe the project doesn't have to be done for a video. Talking to you, editing Lauren. The frogging can be the video, as we're seeing here today. Maybe the gift can become a gift instead of a birthday gift. Maybe the sweater just doesn't need to come on the trip. You have plenty of other ones to wear. And I know that sounds obvious, but when you're stressed out, it's just good to have that reminder in the back of your head too. Third, if I frog, what's the smallest viable restart for it? This is key. Frogging doesn't mean starting all over from scratch if necessary. You don't necessarily have to start from ground zero. You might just have to frog back a sleeve and then reknit the sleeve. Maybe the sweater just needs to become a vest for a little bit. Maybe the gift needs to become a hat instead of a full sweater. Maybe the pattern writer has some grace when it comes to making the test knit. Fourth, if I don't frog, what's the cost? And real cost. Will I spend the next week, month, year annoyed and stressed? Will I finish something I don't like? Will I avoid knitting altogether because I don't want to admit that I was wrong? Will I lose joy in the process? Sometimes frogging costs time, but not frogging can cost a lot of peace. When you're on a time crunch, trust me, peace matters. One of the biggest shifts I've had is frogging as a piece of respect for myself. One of the biggest mindset shifts I've had is frogging is a respect for my future self. Future me is the one that's going to be wearing the sweater. Future me is going to be the one seeing the mistake every day. Future me is going to be opening up the drawer and being like, oh, I did that. Future me is going to have to deal with the consequences of, oh, this is okay, when I know deep down it really isn't. And there is a difference between charming imperfection and a compromise that you fully resent. Charming imperfection can make it feel handmade and whimsical, whereas a resentful compromise really just makes it feel like a shame. When I frog something, I remind myself I'm not punishing myself for a mistake I made in the project. I'm taking care of future me who would have to deal with that problem in the future. I'm saying you deserve a project that you truly like deep down. And that matters way more to me. Because we put so much time into these objects, we shouldn't have to talk ourselves into loving them. Now, practically speaking, frogging while stressed is the dangerous game to play. Because there is a version of frogging where it's calm and controlled, and another version where it is a chaotic dumpster fire. And I have done both. If you are frogging on a time crunch, I highly recommend trying to do it as calm and collective as possible. First, take lots of photos before you rip back. Even if you hate the project, take a picture. This gives you a record of what wasn't working when you realize the mistake. And it might even help you diagnose the problem later on. And it can help you just remember small things about the project. Take lots of notes. Second, write down what you're planning on changing. The needle size, the stitch count, other modifications, the size, the gauge, the yarn behavior, whatever it might be. Don't try to stress out you to remember, because trust me, I forgot what my gauge was. But I did write down my needle size, so all is well. Third, if you're only ripping back part of it, make sure to use a lifeline. Future you will be so grateful that you don't have to go back and pick up stitches and then have to remedy drop stitches you had along the way. Fourth, wind the yarn neatly as you go. This is annoying, but yarn chaos creates emotional chaos as well. If the yarn becomes a tangled mess, suddenly the project has gone from, I need to redo this section, to I am questioning if I'm even going to recast this on. Fifth, take a break after frogging immediately. Even just 10 minutes helps tremendously. Make tea, walk around, cuddle up with your pets. Give your brain a minute to realize that version of the project is done. Then restart with a plan. And I know that sounds very type A and very organized, but it really doesn't need to be fancy. It can literally be a note on your phone that says, frog because the fabric was too loose, restarting on smaller needles, going down one size. The annoying thing about frogging is that it teaches you so much. And I say annoying because sometimes I just don't want the lesson. Sometimes I just want the finished product. But frogging back sometimes teaches you things that you wouldn't have learned if you had finished without frogging. And it teaches you what kind of fabric you genuinely like. It teaches you how your gauge acts when relaxed versus stressed. It teaches you which construction styles you actually like. It teaches you that not every beautiful pattern is necessarily beautiful for you. It teaches you that the yarn can be a beautiful skein, but it's just not for the right project. It teaches you that your taste is allowed to evolve. It teaches you too that your time does matter. And most importantly, it teaches you that you can survive. And most importantly, it teaches you that you can survive undoing something. That does sound dramatic, but it is real. Sometimes we're so afraid of undoing something. Sometimes we're afraid of undoing something that isn't working because we think we lost everything. But then we do it and we realize the yarn is still here, I'm still here, and I can do it. And there's something so comforting about that. Especially in a world where so many decisions we make feel permanent. Knitting can give us a super tangible reminder that some things can be unraveled. Some mistakes can be reknit. Some plans can be reworked. Some deadlines can be renegotiated. And sometimes starting over is not the opposite of progression. It is the form of progress and sometimes starting over is not the opposite of progress. It's the form of progress needed to take. So if you're watching this with a project sitting beside you that just simply isn't working for you, I'm giving you full permission. You are allowed to frog it. Even if you've already posted about it, even if you bought the yarn for that specific project, even if you told someone it would be done soon, even if you're already halfway through it, even if you're already done, even if you're almost done, even if the only reason is you just don't like it anymore, you're allowed to change your mind. You're also allowed to protect your time. You are allowed to think that the finished product is worth feeling discomfort over by starting it over. You're also allowed not to frog if you want to. That's important too. This is not a video saying every mistake you need to go back and fix your mistakes so you can reach some impossible standard of perfection. Sometimes is good enough. Sometimes the deadline matters more than the detail. Sometimes a little wonky section is part of the charm of the project. Sometimes finishing the imperfect thing is just what you needed. The point is not frogging. The point is not that frogging is always the answer. The point is fear is not the only reason to remind yourself to keep going forward. You're allowed to look at the thing and be like, I just don't like this anymore. You're allowed to unravel it. You're also allowed to start again. You're allowed to even when it feels inconvenient, even when it feels a bit dramatic, even when you feel like you don't have the time. Because sometimes frogging isn't what ruins the plan. Sometimes frogging is what saves it. So I would love to hear from y'all in the comments. Are you a fearless frogger, or do you just keep rolling with it? If you see a little mistake in your project, do you tend to keep it or go back and fix it? Me, if it's a small mistake like a twisted stitch, I'll usually go along with it because I feel like it adds a little bit of a quirk to it. And also I know in some Scottish history and a lot of the sweaters they make, they would intentionally put mistakes in it to demonstrate that it was handmade, which is so cool. I love that. But if you did like what you saw today, I would love to hear more from you, and please hit that subscribe button down below. And if you stick around, maybe next week you'll see a finished video of me making these shorts. Fingers crossed. No promises though, because I need to finish these ASAP. Thanks again so much for watching. And with that, XOXO Lauren. Bye.